Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe. Now we continue with one of our other big stories today. Rajesh and Atul Gupta have been arrested, we believe, in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai. The arrests come 4 months after Interpol issued a red notice for them in connection with fraud and money laundering charges. And they're implicated in hundreds of millions of rand of corrupt deals at Eskom, Transnet, amongst other departments. The Department of Justice spokesperson, Chrispin Phiri, joins us now in studio. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
This is a significant development. How long has it been in the making?
Well, it has been a process that started as far back as last year, ensuring that we have the right agreements in place with the UAE. And we believe that now we are in place to really go forth and ensure that the extradition process does take place. As you would recall, I think as you've highlighted in your introduction, as of 4 months ago, there was an Interpol red notice that was sent to the United Arab Emirates and other jurisdictions across the world to confirm if these fugitives from justice are in a particular jurisdiction, and now we've received that confirmation from the law enforcement agencies in the UAE.
So are the Gupta brothers in police custody as we speak?
As we are informed by the law enforcement agencies that side, that they are in their custody, so that's what we believe.
What happens next? South Africans are expecting them to be on a plane in handcuffs coming back to South Africa.
Indeed.
What actually will happen?
Well, extradition is not a process of tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, come, let's go. It's a court process, and it can get quite protracted, as you would have seen in some extradition matters in our own country with other foreign nationals who are wanted in other countries for criminality. They have rights, and they can challenge those processes right up to the highest court in the land. And so that is a process that is likely to take place in the UAE as well, where these individuals have been arrested. And we're most likely to see that process taking a bit of a while. But most importantly, we would then expect our law enforcement agencies, the NPA, to prepare extradition requests as soon as possible, so that the central authority, which is the Minister of Justice and the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, to send that across to their counterparts in the UAE for processing. And so those processes are currently underway as we speak. In the meantime,
I'm guessing that they'll be precluded from travelling with the possibility of maybe even escaping the law. Passports would be taken, that kind of thing?
The UAE government indeed have the responsibility of ensuring that they are available to be extradited, and we would be relying on them, and they're cooperating with us in that regard.
Tell us a bit more about the cooperation that's taking place between the two governments and two authorities at the moment.
Well, I think it's quite self-evident. If they are able to confirm that they have arraigned these individuals and they are ready to bring them before a particular court of law for whatever processes we may request of them, it's quite evident that they are cooperating with us. And it has been a process that has been long in the making. We had, like I said, signed our extradition treaty with them almost to the day last year, as you correctly pointed out earlier when we were speaking. So it is indeed a significant development in that regard, that we're seeing cooperation from our UAE counterparts. But the road has just begun, and we're expecting a lot more cooperation moving forward. As they expect cooperation, one would imagine from us as well, if they would have a particular request.
Does the extradition treaty, it wasn't for the Guptas, it was for arrangements between South Africa and UAE in general in any criminal case, or was this specifically for the Gupta brothers?
Yes, so it's actually called a bilateral treaty between two states to cooperate on particular matters of interest. So when criminality occurs and a foreign national from that country is in this country, how do we ensure that that individual faces justice in the various jurisdictions? And so that's what a bilateral treaty is. But there's also something called a multilateral treaty. In this case, that's the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And that too applies. And both the UAE and South Africa were parties to that prior to the bilateral treaty. So in essence, the bilateral treaty is like a cherry on top. But we did have the multilateral treaty in place, and we also could have relied on that to effect a successful extradition.
What sort of steps can you take between now and when they eventually hear I'm wondering things like the asset forfeiture unit, will they be brought in to try and recover some of the assets maybe? What can happen?
That has been ongoing. I think there are a number of reports that have been abound around the asset forfeiture units doing their part, seizing certain assets across the board. So that is not reliant on an extradition process. An extradition process is bringing the individual across to a jurisdiction where they're required to face the law. So forfeiting of assets and so on, that's completely a different process. And as I understand it, doesn't require a bilateral or rather an extradition process at all.
Is the MPA ready to prosecute the Guptas?
I speak here on behalf of the central authority, but to a point where we are able to say to the world that these are individuals who have been arraigned, we would believe that the NPA is in a position to prosecute them. We believe that they are brought before a court of law. For one to be extradited, you have to be charged before a court of law, which means that the NPA stands ready to prosecute an individual at the point at which they bring charges.
All right. At this stage, there can't be too many countries left where they could go, where they would escape to, and a red notice isn't effective.
I wouldn't know at this stage. I wouldn't say yes, that is the case. But I mean, they are in custody now, and we are in the process of bringing them back through this extradition process. So that's where we are. If anything happens from here, we will take the nation into confidence again, as we have done at this point, to take the nation into confidence that we can confirm that this extradition, or rather this arrest has taken place, and the next step now would be to effect the extradition process.
Red notices sent out 4 months ago. Is it unusual to take 4 months to pick up somebody in the UAE?
Well, this is, I think, to the best of my knowledge, the first extradition matter that we would have in the UAE, or also locating individuals in the UAE. So we don't have a precedent. But just to say, extradition matters in and of themselves do take very long. For instance, you would recall the Srin Diwani case, where he was in the UK and we knew he was in the UK, but the extradition matter itself still took around 3 years. Just across the road, well, proverbially speaking, in Malawi, we still have an extradition matter that's still ongoing. So it's not a matter of snapping your fingers and these processes take place. They can be protracted, both the Interpol processes and the ultimate court processes.
So we're looking at a number of years rather than months before this one is settled.
Let's be hopeful, but indeed, let us also be alive to the fact that these could be protracted.
All right. President Ramaphosa, I'm going to ask you as well. He's got a number of issues on the table. Is the Department of Justice involved in looking at any of these issues?
That's for the law enforcement agencies to answer. And I believe that there is a case that is before the law enforcement agencies, and they can speak for themselves on how they go about investigating such matters and what they look for. But they're a better place to explain to South Africans what that entails.
All right. But as a matter of law, are you allowed to have foreign currency in your house for a period of time? What is the law?
Well, I'm not here to provide legal advice either.
But you're the Department of Justice.
There are laws in place, and there are people who are required to ensure that those laws are complied with. We don't know what the facts are in this case. The President has actually said that what is mentioned in the past...
Aside from the President, just generally, are there laws in terms of whether I'm allowed to keep foreign exchange in the house, or do I have to bank it within a certain period of time? And then also explain where I got the foreign exchange.
There is an act that's actually, I think it's titled the Foreign Exchange Act, and it governs such matters. There's also the FIC Act, which also governs such matters as well, what happens with money and how it gets declared and so on, indeed.
All right. And when somebody comes into the country, you can't just come in with $20,000, $40,000. You've got to declare it at customs, right?
There is a process, yes.
And so it's impossible for someone to come in with millions of dollars and nobody knows about it, in theory.
I suppose that would be the case.
You suppose? Okay. All right. Okay, so the Guptas, it'll take a few years. In the meantime, the MPA will continue to do the work it can do with the people that are here. So we'll be looking at prosecuting the Guptas only in a few years' time at this stage. Is that the final thought, maybe, perhaps?
I wouldn't want to provide a speculative data as to when we should expect them here and when we start seeing prosecutions taking place. But I would want to stress that generally the experience with prosecution and also extradition matters is that these are protracted processes.
Right.
But what is critical is that these are now processes that are potentially before the courts where they belong, and not in the courts of public opinion for people to speculate. But these facts will be presented before an open court process and ventilated upon by the guardians of the Constitution, which are judges. And finally, justice will prevail. So that's, I think, the critical step. But how long it takes is never a process that's in the control of anyone, really. It really depends on the events and how they play themselves out.
All right. So who's communicating with the UAE? Is it your department? Is it the law enforcement agencies? Who's doing the cooperating?
So in essence, our department would be what we call the central authority, represented by the minister. And there is, in essence, like a post box, communicating critical information from the law enforcement agencies over to the other authority, who would in turn do the same with their local enforcement agencies. So we essentially pass on a message that is compiled by the law enforcement agencies in South Africa.
All right. And I mean, this is quite a significant thing. And I suppose South Africans are hoping that what this means is that justice will always be done one way or another, and that countries are cooperating.
There is indeed a saying that the wheels of justice turn ever so slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. And that's what we're seeing here, the wheels of justice turning one way or another.
You know, some people are going to be starting to ask questions, though, about the timing. The president's in trouble here, and then all of a sudden, he doesn't have the power to pick up the phone and say, get that arrest done, get it done now.
Well, some people have intimated, I've seen on social media, that this could be a diversion. We are not in the business of diverting people from a particular matter. We present facts to South Africans as they are and as we understand them. And we'll continue to update the public accordingly, as and when information which is in their interests is brought to our attention.
So this is a coincidence in terms of timing?
Indeed. It's got nothing to do with what's happening domestically. This is an important development, and I think it's important that we brought South Africans up to speed with what's happening with a matter which is in their interests as well. I think corruption is something that has been mentioned as a very pervasive and destructive force on the continent and in South Africa over the past couple of years. So when there are developments to try and bring justice to fruition on matters like this, we have an obligation actually to ensure that we inform South Africans, no matter what is happening in the country. It could have been a pandemic. Right in the middle of the pandemic, we would have been obliged to still inform South Africans around these developments.
People are talking about the Guptas, but people have been moving in and out of the country over time. Are there any other individuals that you know of who might have been cited in the State Capture Commission that are outside the country that you're busy pursuing?
I'm not at liberty to say. I think that would be for the law enforcement agencies to inform South Africans on it. As and when they do, they would inform South Africans, as they've done in this case. And I think they've done so. There's an individual that's currently undergoing extradition processes in the UK. The name is escaped. I think it's Michael Loomis. So that from time to time, the NPA has informed South Africans that these are individuals that we are in pursuit of. So indeed, if there are any other individuals out there, this will be brought to the South Africans' attention as well.
All right. So the next step right now is to actually lodge an extradition request, and that'll be the NPA that does that.
They will be cooperating with their counterparts in the UAE and to ensure that, yes, that process does take place.
All right, and no doubt it will take time, as you say, that they'll probably fight the story on their end.
It probably will, but we are not fortune tellers, so let's wait and see what happens from here.
All right. Are you constantly expanding your extradition arrangements with countries that are not set up at this stage?
Certainly.
I mean, it's interesting that it's taken this long to set up something with the UAE, or was it because a case facilitated it?
Certainly, it is an ongoing process with many many other countries. But in some instances, we have multilateral treaties that apply. So, for instance, with some SADC countries, we might not have a bilateral treaty, but we do have the SADC protocol that we could use to effect a successful extradition, and vice versa with other countries across the world. The UN convention that I've mentioned would also be a tool that we could use. So the bilateral treaty is not the end-all and be-all. There are a number of other international instruments that we can rely on, and even customary international law itself is something that is constantly open to us. So you can't have a situation where criminality occurs in a particular jurisdiction and another jurisdiction harbors criminals from justice. So there is at least a safe net in terms of international law to ensure that we are able to ensure that justice is done, albeit at a protracted process.
All right. I know that you're probably going to say to me, you're not at liberty to say, you're going to leave it to the law enforcement agencies. But when we talk about Namibia, President Hage Geingob has been mentioned, and Namibian authorities have been mentioned. Is there any kind of conversation that happens with your department and your counterparts in Namibia over matters such as this?
It would be folly for me to come and confirm what has been put out through a press statement. I think let's allow investigations to take place. And when there are investigations, law enforcement agencies have an obligation to verify and inform South Africans that this is a fact, this is not a fact. But sitting here, I wouldn't do that. But safe to say that we do collaborate with the Namibians on a number of requests. A lot of countries, we are constantly processing mutual legal assistance requests, extradition requests with a lot of countries across the world. So this is something that the Department of Justice does do. But we don't confirm rumors.
All right. Glencore has been found wanting in other parts of the world. Is something happening to look at their operations here?
To the best of my knowledge, they've not said that, they've not confirmed that bribery took place in South Africa. But I'm sure law enforcement agencies would be looking at their conduct as they would with a number of other multinational corporations. And we have seen other multinational corporations confirming that they have engaged in corruption in South Africa and have entered into settlement agreements. So your McKinseys of this world, your Bain Capitals. So there is a history of multinational corporations confirming that they have indeed been corrupt. And that's actually a very important development in the narrative against corruption. Often we speak of African countries as they are corrupt and they are the ones who initiate this corruption. But when multinational corporations such as McKinsey and Bain tell the world that actually we did engage in corrupt acts, we realize that indeed corruption is not an African phenomenon. It is a worldwide phenomenon.
All right. As the Department of Justice, your feelings about today's developments?
We noted them, and we, like we've said, we continue to cooperate with the UAE. It's not a matter of feelings, Peter. It's a matter of doing what needs to be done.
But it is a success, though, isn't it? I mean, given what's come out of the state capture report, and given that they were charged and that they are fugitives, this is a success for you.
This is what should be done. So I wouldn't say a success is a successful prosecution, but this is what should be done, and this is how the process works.
All right. So warning South Africans that this is just one step in many to come.
Indeed.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much indeed for joining us and giving us a little bit of clarity on the issues that you could.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time. All right, that was Department of Justice spokesperson Chrispin Phiri joining us, talking about this development that's taken place. Of course, the Gupta brothers have been arrested, we understand, in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai. They were fugitives, are fugitives, and are facing extradition to face charges here in South Africa. Just how long that might take, well, we don't know. It could take months, it could take years. But it looks as if that they will face justice at some point in the future. Still so much more to come right here on The Globe, and we start again at the top of the hour. Stay with us.